Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. Jim Bellino hopes ex-wife Alexis Bellino protects her assets if she marries John Jansen. Jim Bellino is speaking out about ex-wife Alexis Bellino's whirlwind relationship with John Jansen for the first time. Alexis returned to the Real Housewives of Orange County this season and has been vocal about her relationship with Johnny J. It has been the topic of much drama because John was previously on the show as Shannon Beater's boyfriend. As a result, Alexis faced an uphill battle this season because viewers have questioned her motives for returning to the show. Jim, who was married to Alexis for 13 years, is now speaking out about Alexis' return and his concerns about John. Jim aired his unfiltered thoughts on the Sarah Fraser Show podcast earlier this month. Firstly, he opened up about watching Alexis and John on a recent Watch What Happens live episode and pointed out that Andy Cohen asked Alexis if she would sign a prenup. "I think that was the wrong question. I think Andy should have asked if John would sign the prenup," the 62-year-old said. He characterized John as very secretive and admitted he was curious about John's career. "In all honesty, if it was very vague what I did, I would want to share that," Jim declared. Ultimately, Jim worries about Alexis and hopes that she protects her assets. "I hope she makes him sign a prenup. I really do," he concluded. Alexis had a slew of backlash since her return to the Bravo reality series. She's been aligned with Tamra Judge, and the pair have joined forces to discredit everything Shannon says. "It's been a lot, but the last few episodes haven't had as much Alexis, and there are now questions about whether she'll continue on the show for season 19. A recent report indicated that producers want her to return, but the issue standing in her way is whether she and Shannon would film together. In the past, these shows faltered when cast members refused to film with each other. Either way, Alexis allegedly wants to return to redeem herself after falling out of favor with the fans. Jim admitted that he hasn't spoken to Alexis about her return to the show, but believes she should have been a full-time cast member and get paid substantially. He believes it doesn't make sense financially for her not to go all in with the show. Alexis is set to take center stage at the upcoming RHOC reunion, which will likely air on Bravo next month. Her future beyond that is very much up in the air. Jim Bellino sat in his sleek, modern Newport Beach home, the California sunset casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was quiet in the house, a silence that gave him far too much time to think. He leaned back in his leather armchair, sipping on a glass of whiskey, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The memories of his past life, especially his marriage to Alexis, seemed more distant with every passing day, but they never fully disappeared. And now there was talk of Alexis marrying again, to a man named John Jansen. Jim wasn't bitter, at least that's what he told himself. Life had moved on for both of them. But when news reached him about Alexis's potential wedding plans, something stirred inside him. He knew all too well how the world of marriages and divorces worked, especially when it came to money. His own divorce from Alexis had been a lesson in the unpredictability of emotions and finances intertwining, the costly education he wouldn't wish on anyone, least of all his ex-wife. Jim poured himself another drink and swirled the amber liquid in the glass. The thought of Alexis getting married again wasn't what bothered him the most. People remarry, find love again, it was natural. What gnawed at him was the potential risk she could be walking into if she wasn't careful. Love had a funny way of clouding judgment, and in his experience, it was easy to ignore the practical realities when emotions ran high. Jim had once believed that love would be enough, but the brutal reality of their divorce had shattered that illusion. Love didn't protect assets. Contracts did. He placed the glass down and stared at his phone, debating whether to reach out. He hadn't spoken to Alexis in a while, only necessary communications about the kids, co-parenting logistics, and the occasional event. Their relationship had settled into a kind of distant cordiality, but there was still an undercurrent of tension from the wounds their divorce had left behind. The media had latched onto the potential of Alexis marrying John Jansen, and Jim couldn't help but wonder about Jansen's intentions. He knew nothing about the man, but it was hard not to be suspicious when someone came into the picture post-divorce. Was this guy genuinely in love with Alexis, or was there something more opportunistic lurking behind the scenes? He pulled up an article on his phone, a puff piece, gushing over Alexis's new relationship, how she seemed happy, how John seemed like a stable, grounded guy. Still, Jim couldn't shake the unease. Alexis had worked hard since their split. She built a life for herself, secured her own wealth, and was thriving in ways that weren't always apparent when they were together. The last thing Jim wanted was to see her lose that, not after everything she'd been through. His mind flashed back to the courtrooms, the lawyers, the endless discussions about assets, custody, and finances. It wasn't pretty, but it was necessary. He had come out of it with a deeper understanding of just how fragile financial security could be, especially when love and marriage entered the mix. Alexis had emerged stronger too, but now, with the prospect of her marrying again, Jim hoped she wouldn't let her guard down. Prenup, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. The word carried so much weight, yet it was one that people often hesitated to embrace because it seemed unromantic, cynical even. But Jim knew better. A prenuptial agreement wasn't about expecting the worst. It was about being prepared for it. It was about protecting what you had worked for, ensuring that no matter how things ended, if they did, you wouldn't be left in financial ruin. Jim picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Alexis's contact. What would he even say? How could he possibly approach this without coming off as bitter or overstepping boundaries? It wasn't his place to tell her what to do, and yet he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he should say something, at least to make sure she was considering her financial future in this new chapter of her life. After a moment's hesitation, he typed out a message. "Hey, I heard about you and Jean. Congrats. Just wanted to say, I hope you're protecting yourself and your assets. You've worked hard for everything you have. Don't let anyone take that away from you." He stared at the words on the screen, knowing they came from a place of genuine concern, but also recognizing how easily they could be misinterpreted. Would Alexis see this as meddling, or would she appreciate the sentiment? Jim sighed, deleting the message before he could second-guess himself any further. Maybe it wasn't his place to say anything, but he hoped someone in her life would. It wasn't that he doubted Alexis's judgment, but he knew firsthand how love could make even the smartest people forget about the practicalities. Alexis was a smart woman. She had learned a lot since their marriage, but Jim also knew how persuasive emotions could be, especially when it came to new love. John Jansen might be a great guy, but that didn't change the reality that Alexis had assets to protect, assets that could easily become entangled in the complexities of a second marriage. He stood up, pacing the length of the living room, his thoughts racing. Alexis had always had a big heart, but in his mind, that heart needed to be balanced with a clear head, especially now. Jim knew better than anyone how easily things could fall apart, and when they did, it was the financial fallout that lingered long after the emotional wounds had healed. If Alexis was serious about marrying John, Jim could only hope she had learned from their own experience. Love might be beautiful, but financial security was its own kind of comfort, one that wasn't always guaranteed in the messy world of relationships. Jim downed the last of his whiskey, the burn of the alcohol dulling the edge of his thoughts. He wasn't trying to be the overprotective ex-husband. He simply wanted Alexis to be smart, to protect what was hers. He knew she was capable of that, but still, a part of him couldn't help but worry. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the room in twilight, Jim sat back down, feeling the weight of his own past settle over him like a heavy blanket. He had made his peace with their divorce, but he couldn't shake the hope that Alexis would protect her future, even if it meant making some tough, unromantic decisions.